Hello, everybody. A very good morning to you. Thank you for taking the time out to listen to the webinar that we have in place today, just with regards to group scheme and pension benefits. Just a few tips for today. Obviously, there's quite a few people attending. So in the event that you do have any questions that are relevant, there is a chat box. So please put your questions in the chat box there. And by the end of the seminar, then I'll go through them with Adrian and he can answer them as and when. For those of you who don't know much about ourselves or have never had the opportunity to deal with this before, this is just a little bit about our setup. So Oaktree is a business that commenced back in 2010. So we're almost 11 years in existence. We didn't quite get to celebrate the celebrations we wanted last year, but hopefully we'll be able to rectify that now this year. We do have over 1,500 clients and 20 million under asset management. The providers that we deal with here basically are all the leading providers out there in the marketplace. So we deal with all the leading life companies, the investment managers, and the sole purpose of that is to ensure that we can offer the best possible solutions to all our clients, dependent on what type of service or product it is that they require. This particular topic is about group schemes because it does seem to be, for whatever reason, an area that is of particular interest these days. So this is exactly what Adrian is going to cover. I'm going to hand you over to him and you'll hear my dulcet tones again at the end of the presentation. So I hope you enjoy, and please, again, feel free to offer any questions into the chat box. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. Good morning, everyone. So I just need to try and actually do this. Okay, right. So the main things we're covering this morning is just in relation to group pension and risk benefits. So for a lot of people, it's just a case of, well, what are they? What are the employer obligations? What's happening with auto enrollment in the market? And then a look at the individual items itself. So what's included in a group pension? What do we need to be looking at? What do we need to be looking at with group risk? Why, as an employer, would you offer a scheme? The next point then is, why would you use a broker? So why would you use someone like Oaktree in relation to actually doing this? What happens next? And then some questions and answers. So if we kick off, sorry now. Okay, so basically, what is a group pensions and risk benefit scheme? It's a workplace pension. So the group pension element is just a workplace pension run by the employer. The most common types is a defined contribution scheme, often set up as a group personal pension that the company offers to employees. Some people will have defined benefit schemes, so they're an older scheme, but the newer ones and the ones that are more common in the marketplace today is the defined contribution scheme. With that, then you can have add-on or standalone benefits to the scheme. So most commonly known would be the death in service one. So if an employee passes away while they're employed by your company, that lump sum can be paid directly to the employee's family, and it can be paid tax-free as long as the scheme has been set up correctly. The second part of that is income protection. So again, group income protection is an insurance policy that will pay an employee's salary if they're unable to work as a result of illness or injury. And that we can also set that up that it covers the cost of both the employer and the employee contributions into the pension scheme. So it can be quite lucrative long-term for staff. So while we're talking about group pensions and group risk benefits, there are actually three individual items here. So you can have the group pension, you can have the death in service, or you can have the income protection, or you can have one or more included in one overall scheme. In general, what we see is that all three would be included on the larger schemes, but again, it's up to each individual company. So what are the employer obligations? So there was legislation introduced back in 2002, and unfortunately many companies are not aware of it. So where the employer must provide access for employees to at least one standard PRSA policy, where it does not operate a company scheme or where the staff are not eligible to join for the first 6 months, or where the scheme only provides death in service benefits. A lot of companies out there are not aware of this, or a lot of employers really are not aware of this, that they think that because their staff aren't asking them for a pension, they don't have a legal obligation to provide access to them. And that's wrong. They do need to do this, and it needs to be done on an annual basis. So where the scheme doesn't provide an AVC facility, then an AVC PRSA facility also needs to be provided. So it is extremely important that people actually realize, or that employers realize their obligations around this. So if you aren't in a scheme and you do have employees, then you must offer this PRSA facility. So what is it? Basically, the employer must enter into a contract with a PRSA provider. So that's one of the life companies. They must notify the employees of their right to contribute to the PRSA scheme. They must allow reasonable paid leave from work for excluded employees to set up a PRSA. So excluded employees, as we mentioned, are employees that don't have that aren't part of the main scheme because they haven't been there for 6 months, or where there is no main scheme, or where there is only a death in service element in the main scheme. The employer must deduct contributions made by the employees under the net pay arrangement and apply tax relief at source. They must remit PRSA contributions to the PRSA provider. They must confirm that the PRSA contributions in the previous month have been remitted. Generally, that's done through the employee's tax payslip. And they must also ensure that maximum contributions for tax relief purposes are not exceeded. So it can become quite onerous on the employer where they're just offering this PRSA facility. And again, they need to provide proof that they have offered this. So they need to show communication with the employees. They need to show the contract with the PRSA provider to ensure that they have actually provided this information directly across to the employees. The other thing that the employer must also do is if they make a contribution, if the employer makes a contribution to the PRSA scheme, which they're not obliged to do, but if they do, they must also return that contribution to revenue as a benefit in kind. Okay, so auto enrollment, this has been mooted since about 2006. We are now at 2021. They are currently about 2 years, maybe even 3 years behind where they actually are hoping to be, I think. So the aim of auto enrollment is to deliver security, equity, choice, and clarity. Basically, what they want to try and do is ensure that everyone has the option to access a pension scheme. And it's almost that you have to opt out rather than opt in. So at the moment, we have very much an opt-in situation, whereas the new system going forward will be opt out. There's going to be a specific range of funds. It's going to be including low risk default options. Again, what they're trying to do here is make it available to everyone at a very low risk and a very low cost. That's the aim here. But if you do contribute to the scheme and you contribute for less than 5 years, you won't get this one-off bonus that they're talking about. So if you're there for more than 5 years without a break in contributions, then you will get this one-off bonus. It's targeting younger people in order to try and actually make sure that they're going to continue in the scheme and stay with the scheme over a number of years. So again, this is the 22 piece. So once a person enters employment or changes employment and is over 22 years of age, he or she will be automatically enrolled in the new scheme unless the employee is a member of their employer's scheme. Now, just to be aware that the employer's scheme here must be correctly established. So it can't be just a death in service scheme. It has to have a number of things available to it. So it has to be a defined benefit scheme or a defined contribution scheme where the employer is also contributing directly to that scheme of an amount equal to what's required under the auto enrollment system. So they must actually be contributing, the employer must be contributing to the system in order to be availing of it. So employees will be automatically enrolled into a new pension unless they are a member of their employer scheme. So that's what we just said. Contributions to the new scheme will be made within a band of earnings. So again, this is very similar to what's actually there at the moment. So above a certain amount, there's going to be restrictions, and they're now also saying that if you're earning below a certain amount, you will be exempt from having to partake of this. So employees will be required to make a fixed percentage contribution, and the state then will make a contribution equal to 33% tax relief to the pension scheme. So that's for those employees that are currently on a 40% tax rate. That's going to be less than what they're currently getting. But for those employees that are on a lower wage and at a 20% tax rate, then this will actually benefit them better. They will get more tax relief on it. The employers are also going to be obliged to contribute to the scheme. Now, at the moment, there's a talk that it's going to be phased in over a period of time. We're not sure how long that period of time is. It has only been kind of, I suppose, preliminary dates and things like that put out there. But overall, it's expected that the employer's contribution will be at least 6% by the time this is fully phased in. So a very simple example of how it will work. So a contribution of €4 to the scheme will comprise an employee contribution of €2, state contribution of €1, and an employer contribution of €1. So again, that's your tax relief and everything like that built into the whole thing. So it's a very simple example of what it will be. So I suppose with auto enrollment, it's a case of, well, where are we now? A very good question. We're not sure is the short and simple answer about it. There was talks of having this introduced by 2025, 2026 in full, where it was almost supposed to be commencing in 2021, 2022, but they are way behind in relation to this. And one of the things that's out there at the moment is suggesting that it is possibly 2031 by the time auto enrollment will actually come in fully. So if we look at what we're actually here to talk about, which is group pension schemes and the risk elements. So if we look first at the group pension scheme, so what is it? It's basically an occupational pension scheme. It's going to be set up under trust or a statutory basis. So the statutory basis is more for your public sector or semi-state bodies, Department of Health, Department of Education, those type of ones, whereas most other schemes are going to be set up under trust. The trust then is just a legal arrangement used to establish the scheme, under which the trustees hold the assets of the pension in a trust fund for the benefit of the members of the scheme and their dependents. So it's very simply, it's basically you as the employer or your trustee are looking after those assets and just ensuring that those assets are correctly applied, that the contributions that are coming in are correctly applied, that there's no breaches within the actual fund itself, and that the provider of the fund is acting in the best interests of the members as well. So that's basically what it boils down to. For many companies, we can actually arrange the trusteeship to be provided free of charge. So that's something that I think a lot of employers are taking or availing of at the moment. So it does make a huge difference to the costs overall. Another huge point here is that there is no benefit in kind on the employer contribution to a group pension scheme. So if you remember, I was saying in relation to the PRSA option, if the employer is making a contribution to that scheme, to the PRSA scheme, then that is a benefit in kind, and that needs to be returned on the revenue tax return at the end of the year in relation to benefits in kind for staff. So there's none on a group pension scheme. So as the employer, what are your main considerations here? Well, first of all, how much as an employer are you thinking that you'll contribute to the scheme? And that varies. It varies hugely. we have some companies that will contribute 2% of the salary levels, right the way up to 20% of salary levels. So it does very much depend on the company themselves and how much they want to actually be involved or help their employees along. It also depends a little bit as well on the executives and the ordinary staff members within the scheme. So a lot of employer companies will actually set up a separate scheme for management. So what that does is it just means that they can contribute at different levels and use different investment strategies than the other employees in the scheme. So again, that's something that is available and needs to be considered. The other thing to consider as well is vesting rights. So you, as an employee, under a PRSA scheme, the employee is entitled to their contributions and your contributions immediately. So regardless of whether they stay 2 years or not, they're entitled to those contributions under the PRSA scheme immediately. Under the group pension scheme, you can actually put in place a vesting rights period, so that if the employee leaves your employment within the first 2 years, they are only entitled to a refund of their own contributions and not your contribution. So that is something that needs to be considered as well. Again, you may have some employees that have been with you for a number of years. If you're only starting the scheme now, that you may be quite happy to allow those vesting rights to apply immediately. The other thing that needs to be considered as well is the generic or the general investment strategy of the scheme. In most cases and in most of our advices, we would advise companies and employers to just work off a lifestyling choice. So the lifestyling choice is basically aims to gradually reduce your risk as you approach retirement. So in your 30s, you might be in a higher risk fund. Obviously in your 50s, as you get closer to retirement, you'll be in a lower risk fund. And that automatically triggers as you hit certain stages throughout your journey in the employment of the company and as you hit certain ages. So that is something that also needs to be considered as well as an employer. The second element to this then is group risk. So group risk is the umbrella term used for three different types of cumulative company-sponsored employee benefits, right? So those are the group life insurance, the death in service that we mentioned earlier, group income protection, and group critical illness. So the main thing that we need to look at with each of these is that you can actually provide them all separately, or you can provide them all together with the main scheme, the main pension scheme, should you wish. So if we look at the death in service piece of it first, so it's typically the most common of the benefits. And what happens is it gets paid to the beneficiaries of the employee. So if I die and there's a death in service on me, it gets paid to my wife or my kids, depending on how I have set it up with my letter of wishes, is what it's known as. There can also be a separate dependents death in service pension provided if the employers want to go down that road as well and set up something else. The lump sum death in service benefits can normally be paid tax-free, up to 4 times remuneration. So in most cases, that would be the cap. We wouldn't see any death in service any higher than 4 times remuneration. It can be very cost effective for employers as well to provide these benefits. Generally, the premiums paid are available as offset against corporation tax, and they're not regarded as benefit in kind. So again, it can become a huge benefit in terms of retaining employees into the future. Again, there's no benefit in kind on the employee in relation to the benefit provided. So how is it priced? So the pricing is based on a mix of male and female lives, their ages, their occupation, the nature of the business, whether there's been claims in the past, and then this current active at work element. So active at work basically means, is everyone at work? Is there anyone off in receipt of disability or anything like that? So if you have a company and you have 50 staff and everyone is at work, then what it's going to be solely based on is the mix of male and female lives, their ages, their occupation, the nature of the business, and whether or not there have been any claims in the past. So from that, then you look at the underwriting element, and typically none is required, but sometimes they can look for underwriting to be completed on that individual that is not actively at work, just to make sure that the life company is satisfied that they're going to return to work, or that they're okay to return to work. The other element of this is, so once you've got your pricing and you've got all your staff covered for X times salary, and you bring on new staff members, that's going to be a huge part of everyone's business is bringing on new staff or staff leaving and things like that. So we need to make sure that there's that it's easy enough to add new people. So this free cover limit is a very attractive element, because what it does is it allows new staff to be brought on automatically, and they're covered to a certain limit automatically. So you could have staff payroll costs of or your highest salary payment going out of maybe 200,000, and the company, the life company, may say, okay, the amount of people at 200,000 versus the amount of people at 40,000 is going to be way lower at the 40,000, or sorry, there's going to be less people at the 200,000. So take the average salary and multiply that by 4, and that's typically how they'll come up with this free cover limit. So they may say that if you take on someone at 40,000, 4 times salary is 160,000. The free cover limit that the company may have put in place could be 350,000. So it does mean that these staff that are brought on are covered automatically, and there's no underwriting required. Where it might become an issue is if you take on a new CEO or something like that, where they're on a much higher salary than previous, then that is something that you would need to discuss. The second element to it is income protection. So again, what income protection is about, and these are very similar to personal products. It basically is designed to provide a continuing source of income, or replacing a portion of salary for employees once an illness or injury prevents them from working for a prolonged period of time. There's a lot of businesses out there that think they will never use this, but unfortunately it does happen from time to time that an employee becomes ill and is unable to work. So it's designed to replace any lost income whereby the employee has to take a part-time or lower paid position in the company as well. So someone is out, but they can come back, but on a reduced hours basis or something like this, because of that injury or because of that illness where they can't return to work full time. It will also cover a portion of that. The cover is utilized by the employer to cover a promise of long-term sick pay to employees. So it just means that if you have a sick term or sick pay policy in your own policies and procedures, this is a way of covering off the long-term elements of that. Benefits begin to be payable after a pre-arranged waiting period, typically from 4 weeks, but it is more commonly to 6 months. So the first 26 weeks of claim will not be paid. So if you have someone who is out with, for argument's sake, cancer, that first 6 months isn't paid. But again, most companies have a sick pay policy that will cover those first 6 months. So again, it does need to interact with your own sick pay policy. It's generally payable until the retirement date. So again, that would normally be 65 for most people, but it also does, but it stops if the person returns to work. So again, that just needs to be remembered. It will stop if the person returns to work, or it gets reduced if the person returns to part-time work. There are 2 elements. The main part of it is the member benefit to provide the ongoing income. So that's going to be the main piece. There's also a premium protection, as we mentioned earlier, to maintain the pension contributions for the employee and the employer. And that's a huge benefit for most companies that they take out. So how is it calculated? The way it works is the maximum that benefit that you can set up is 75% of salary less the state benefit. So, and that state benefit is currently €10,556. Most schemes will work on a 2/3 salary basis, so 66.67% of the salary. If the member actually makes a claim, how is it dealt with? So the benefit is taxable and treated as subject to income tax, USC, and PRSI. So the insurance company pays the employer, and the employer then pays the staff member. Insurers will always try and support the member with medical as well as financial support. So a lot of the companies out there will have second opinion doctors, they will have anxiety and mental health counselors and support available to staff. So there is a lot of benefits and supports that are made available to the member. And I suppose the main reason for that is because the insurers also want the member to return to work so that they don't have to continue making payments on the claim. Now, if the member cannot and or is unable to return to work, then obviously that insurance continues to pay throughout their employment up until retirement. So as we mentioned, there is this payment of proportionate benefit, allowing the individual to return to work on a part-time basis. We would have quite a lot of people who are in claim, but are able to work maybe 15, 16, 17 hours a week. And they will be receiving a proportionate benefit for the shortfall in hours because of being unable to do a full-time job. There's also a situation where if it's a linked claim, so if there's a relapse, then the insurer will not impose a new deferred period. Again, that's a huge benefit, because obviously if you have someone who, for argument's sake, again, has cancer and there's a relapse after they've returned to work, then having to wait another 26 weeks before being in payment again is not good for anyone. So the pricing and the free cover limits, again, it's very similar to the death in service element. It's based on their ages, the occupations, and whether there's been claims in the past as well. The third element is critical illness, group risk critical illness. This is very uncommon, I guess, on most group schemes. We would have very, very little of this put in place by schemes. They mainly would go with the death in service and the income protection element. But essentially what it's designed to do is to pay a lump sum to the employee on the diagnosis of one of a defined list of serious conditions. So again, that would be a cancer or a heart attack or those kind of things. It's important to note that it's only paid if you survive after a specified period. So in a personal critical illness situation, once your diagnosis matches the policy conditions, then the payment is made. In a group critical illness scheme, the diagnosis must match the requirements, but on top of that, you must also survive a specified period before you actually get the claim. So again, they're not that common on most group schemes. So why would you offer a group pension scheme and or a group risk scheme? What are the main reasons for that? One of the main reasons here is attracting key employees. The most effective way of attracting them is by offering an appealing pension and death benefits package. So anyone that's in HR will know that when you're going out to the market looking for people, it's all about the benefits, it's all about the package, it's all about what am I getting out of this? And this is a huge one. And I think over the last maybe 3 to 5 years, we've seen more and more younger employees looking for these benefits being added, which I suppose is a little bit unusual, but I mean, they're now becoming more and more aware of them, and they want them added onto their schemes. They want them added as part of the package. It's a great way of building employee loyalty. So it means that if you as the employer are contributing, it shows the employees that you're concerned about their future and their well-being. And that's, again, it's all to do with making sure that you as the employer show your employees that you're concerned. Again, we would see a huge amount of companies that do this and get it set up right and get the member engagement correct on that, so that they all know that, well, we as the employer are paying this for you. The tax efficiency, so again, providing, making the contributions to the pension scheme is tax efficient. The contributions do receive tax relief. And one of the things to note here as well is just in relation to company owners. So again, I was talking about this executive element. So the company owners and directors can be included for death benefits on the risk scheme, even if they want to keep their pension benefits separate. So that's a huge one. So we would have a number of companies as well that have almost three elements to it. You have an executive scheme, you have the group pension scheme, and then the group risk scheme includes everyone. So it does cover off everything. I just want to kind of compare the group scheme versus the PRSA option. So this is, so the PRSA option is the employer obligation, what they must actually do, and the group scheme is what we're talking about here. These are only some of the comparisons between them. So the first thing is the charges, right? So on a PRSA option, there has to be a standard PRSA. So the standard PRSA is a 5% contribution charge and a 1% management charge. The contribution charge means that if you put in 100 euros, 95 euros of the contribution is allocated to your fund. The other 5% goes in charges. On a group scheme, there is no contribution charge. And in most cases, the annual management charge will work out lower than a PRSA. So typically, you can get that somewhere between 0.65 and 0.85%. The fund choice is quite restricted on a PRSA option, where it's much wider in a group pension scheme. So we would have a number of companies and employees that would approach us where one specific employee maybe needs or wants to do a pension and the employer is talking a PRSA option. We would always try and explain to both the employer and the employee that the group scheme will work better because you have a better access to funds and your charges are not going to be as high. The risk benefits, so with the PRSA option, they cannot be included with that. They must be separate. A separate scheme is established where under the group scheme, you can actually include all the risk benefits under the same scheme. The trusteeship, there's none required under the PRSA option. It is required under the group scheme, but as we mentioned, in most cases, it can be got for free. The revenue reporting, so under the PRSA option, again, the employer must report the benefit in kind for the employee on any employer contributions it makes, where under the group scheme, there's no requirement to do that. That revenue reporting one is one that I think a lot of companies have missed out on. Over the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen a number of companies that have approached us that have a scheme in place, a PRSA scheme that they are contributing to and have been contributing to for a number of years. And they've never met these revenue reports, and they're actually in breach of law, because I mean it's a revenue requirement that they make these returns, and they haven't done that. The vested rights, as I mentioned earlier, under the PRSA option, the employer is not entitled to a refund of their contributions where the employee has left before 2 years of service, where under the group scheme, they are entitled to a refund of their own contributions, and the employee is only entitled to the employer contributions after 2 years of pensionable service. Okay, so I guess it comes on to us. Well, why would you use a broker? The main reason is it's hassle-free group pension scheme implementation and management is what you're actually looking for. It's making sure that you get it done right the first time. Our thing is that we would always say a successful scheme is vital. It allows it makes sure your employees are aware of the benefits that are available to them, and that their own financial security in retirement is being looked after. So there are 3 elements to this. So you have the employer guidance, you have the member engagement, and you have governance and the trusteeship part of it, all leading to the successful pension scheme. So you can see there, so the employer guidance. So as an employer and business manager, your main concern is ensuring the success of your business. So you will need any pension and or death benefits package to be cost effective and not time consuming to manage. So that's a huge part. The time consuming piece is always the one that comes back to us as being the main reason why companies approach us, because they just don't have the time to deal with this. So what can we do? So we can help you as the employer to understand the legislation requirements, the investment options, and what your competitors are offering to their employees. So again, we would see from the number of companies we deal with what other companies are actually doing. We can advise on the correct and most cost-efficient structures for your company, how best to set it up. And we can also help select the correct provider. That's a huge part of it. You want a provider that's actually able to work with you, and that has got good customer service from both the members' point of view in terms of any claims that need to be made, but also the employer's element in terms of making contributions to the scheme as well. We also ensure that the pension scheme performance is reviewed regularly, and we make administration hassle-free as possible by managing the selected provider relationship. So what we try and do here is we become the go-between. So if you have an issue, you approach us, you have one point of contact, and then we're actually able to deal directly with the provider on that. We also then look at member engagement. So once the scheme is actually established, its success is dependent on how your members, your staff actually engage with it. So what we look to try and do is we do a number of member presentations on benefits, investment options, contribution levels, and what to expect at retirement. These are done whenever is needed. We do offer one-to-one guidance on pension scheme benefits, the literature and the application forms for new members should they wish. We can provide literature and advice on maximizing personal contributions. Again, that can be done with all the employees. The main one here is that we do offer one-to-one member reviews to discuss the employee's individual funds and their needs. And as I mentioned earlier, we are the direct contact. So if the employee has an issue or you have an issue, you come directly to us and we can actually deal with that. Lastly, then we have the individual financial planning advice. So our main aim is to make sure that if we take on X Limited as a company with 50 staff, we've actually taken on 51 clients, because it's very important that the members fully realize that they have access to financial planning advice. The amount of companies, again, that have approached us and said, well, you know, we're just not getting that from the life company that we're with or whatever, but that should be there, because it all leads to making sure that if the employee is happy with the benefits being provided or is fully aware and made aware on a regular basis of the benefits that their employer is providing, that will make them more loyal and should make them stay longer as well. The governance and trustee piece. So again, often the employers act as the trustee of their own pension schemes, which means ensuring the pension scheme is compliant. There's huge amounts of legislation and training required in order to do that. The pension authority can and do find trustees that don't meet their obligations. So our side of things is to ensure that we put in place a trustee who can actually work with you and take that onus away from you as the employer. And again, as I said, we can, in most cases, arrange that for free. And that makes a huge difference to companies. They now don't have the responsibility of actually ensuring that they're compliant with the pensions legislation, as well as with everything else that they need to be compliant with. So why would you change provider? So this is something, I suppose, that we're seeing a huge amount of in the market at the moment is companies that have a scheme in place and that are looking to just move. So poor investment performance is one. So there are always going to be companies out there that will perform better than others. Our job is to find those companies and to ensure that you can work with those. The other side of this is the high fees or hidden fees that can often be there. So that's relating to management charges, low allocation rates. So again, as we were mentioning, on the PRSA side of things, there's a 5% contribution charge. There are older group schemes that have been established, maybe not not as recent as others, but there is companies out there that will charge this contribution piece up front, and it just means that the members' funds are being eroded, which is not what people want. Excessive trusteeship fees, again, that's another huge one, and especially where you're not getting value for money out of that. Or there could be high policy fees or administration fees built in, so the annual management charge, where those are not actually being managed correctly. Poor levels of service is a huge one. So whether it be the trustee or the actual provider itself, are you getting a good level of service? If you have a member that's about to go into claim, so something happens to one of your staff members and they're about to go into claim, you need to be able to contact the provider and get a good level of service so that things are turned around quite quickly. All too often we're hearing from other companies about the amount of time that they're spending trying to chase down either the provider, the life company itself, or the broker that they're using. And they're being treated as a number as opposed to an individual, and that's not good. What the whole reason that the employer is putting these benefits in place is for the benefit of their staff, and they need to make sure that the staff member gets a good level of service in the event of a claim, especially at times when they really need that. The other side of this is that there would be complicated structures put in place. It's where they're not providing genuine benefits. So it's all being fluffed a little bit, and it's not really very clear what the member actually has. We do see quite a lot of that as well going on. The little transparency, again, it's the same type of thing where there's not clear guidance on what happens when a member goes into claim. What are the conditions for the member to go into claim? What do they need to have completed? Who do they need to have seen? Who do they need to have spoken to? All of that. So it is very important, again, that you make sure that all of that is crystal clear with your provider. The annual reviews is another part of it where all you're seeing is a document arriving out on an annual basis from your provider to your staff, and that's it. That's the only communication that they're getting, and there's nothing else being sent out to them. And that, in one sense, is devaluing the benefit that you're providing to your staff members. If your staff members are not getting what they want out of this, that piece of paper coming out saying that you've contributed 15% of their salary to the scheme is just a waste of time. It doesn't actually do anything. So I suppose what's next? We would say to people just to review your existing scheme, make sure you're happy with the provider. If it's a new scheme, make sure you understand what your employees want and engage them in the process. And again, that's one of the things we would do with a lot of companies that are coming to us, where you're actually sitting in front of staff members, just explaining what it is that's going to happen here and how they're going to benefit. Again, the employee will always want to know what's in it for them and what am I going to get out of this. And you as the employer need to sell what it is you're actually going to be doing for them in terms of the benefits you're providing. So that's huge. Also, it's very important to get clear advice of what is included in your scheme. As I mentioned earlier, the lack of transparency and complicated structures can often mean that things get hidden within your scheme and it's not very clear what's actually going on. As always, we do recommend you seek professional advice. And I think that is me. So Tracy, you're back on with me. Tracy, you're on mute.
No, can you hear me now? Yeah. Oh my God, you must be very much looking forward to a nice glass of water now, Aidan, are you? It's amazing, isn't it, when you start going through these presentations, the detail, and I think on these forums it's even more difficult because you've got so much information, that you want to share. So I do hope those of you that are attending, have found that beneficial. We do have a couple of questions, Adrian. Now, there's a bit too many to go through, so because I'm very conscious of the time here. I'll again just pick a few randomly. One of the question was, what is the cost of the death in service and the income protection benefit?
As I said, it very much depends on your staff mix. So male, female, age, occupation, and company, what the actual company is doing, what's their profession. I suppose on a kind of a rough guide, what we have seen in the past is somewhere around maybe 20 euros per member per month for the debt in service, and about 50 something euros maybe for the income protection piece. Again, those are very rough figures, but you know, each company will be dealt with differently in terms of its pricing.
Okay. Another question here, again, a slightly different area. It says, we have a scheme in place, but there's no member engagement. Our staff are telling us that they only hear from the company when there's when there's statement issues, and how do we change this?
Yeah, I suppose that's the one thing I was just saying there earlier on. Like, you know, it's all about the member engagement. It's about making sure that your staff understand the benefits that are available to them. Not only available to them, but that they're costing you as the employer. So they are effectively an additional salary piece that the employer is paying for. How do you change it? It's very difficult. If the provider is only kind of engaging or sending out statements, they're what they're doing is they're following their legislative remit. They have to communicate with the staff once a year, and that's through the statement. Your job as the employer is just to try and make sure that you find a provider that will do more, that will do what you want, I guess, is the answer on that.
Mm. And I mean, I think the reality is a lot of the new schemes that we've taken on the last 12 months would be, you know, because of per service from existing
Oh,
providers.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Like, you know, there is, I suppose one of the cases that we took over there recently was purely because the company that was involved just was getting no responses to any queries they were submitting to the main provider. And that's soul destroying from a company's perspective. They've enough to do in terms of running the business without actually following up on something like that. You know, and that's I suppose one of the main reasons we would have won that scheme at the time was because purely because of service.
Yeah. Now listen, there's loads of questions. So those that we don't get the opportunity, I'll pick one more, but for the rest of you, please, we will respond. We will contact you via your email address and give you the answers that you deserve.
Okay.
One very last question is, how many people can be in a scheme?
As many as you want. We've
Or as
schemes
little or as few as you
as
need?
possible, exactly. So a group scheme can be set up with 2 people, 3 people. You know, so you may have a very small business, a very lucrative business with 3 people in it. A group scheme can be set up with that, right the way up to a couple of thousand people. So
Yeah.
there's no minimum on it. Well, there is, like for a group, it has to be at least 2.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's the only requirement.
Okay, well, I think that's it. Adrian, thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thanks everyone for
And yeah,
attending.
thank you all for attending. And yeah, any questions, any more questions, please send them through.
Super. Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Bye now.
Thanks, Tracy. Bye. Bye-bye.